You went from 0 to 50K, your first 50,000 in revenue, very quickly. And then what happened?
And then we had to build out our team after that. You know, we needed a lot more people in engineering, people in sales, help with operations, customer success, etc. And that was the period where it was just me and Kenson, and we kind of scaled.
The first customers you had, what was the product at that point?
We were selling spreadsheets for our first 30K of monthly revenue. We were literally giving teams a new spreadsheet every single week. We asked them what data they wanted, and then we went and we were the agents, and a week later we gave them a spreadsheet.
Where did you find those first customers?
When we first got started, we had no stack at all. So I was taking calls randomly on Saturday and Sunday. It was miserable, you know. I'd take, 14 hours of calls and then stay up all night coding with Kenson. And it was absolutely miserable because you just can't stop. You can't say no when people are interested in your product.
Have you ever had to fire one of your friends?
I have. It was super unfortunate. It's just super painful because they trusted you and they took a bet on you and they know that you knew them very well. It's just 100% your fault if you want to achieve greatness with bringing friends onto your team and, build something with your best friends for years to come, because it's not all, sunshine.
I put out a tweet a couple days ago saying that I had a list of really cracked builders, designers, developers, growth people, and I asked who's hiring. And I realized from the comments that there are a lot of people who are hiring. And so if you're someone that wants to get into startups, whether you're a developer or a designer or a growth hacker, or you vibe code on the weekends, there is a link in the description where you should apply so that we can send your resume to all of our friends who are hiring, including Finn. All right, Finn, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm going to read out your tweet just to get started here. POV, you left Stanford after the first day of class to build an AI startup. 8 months later, your 10 most cracked friends all moved to SF to help you build it. And it was seen 9.5 million times.
So ridiculous, man. I think that was my Mona Lisa of cringe startup posts.
You can't get better than that now.
I really can't do better.
So for context, you're building Origami. And Origami is what? It's an AI agent startup.
Yeah, AI research agents purpose-built for sales teams.
I think the cool thing is we talked a little bit about how you actually came up with the idea. And it was rooted in your actual history of stuff that you've worked on in the past versus the typical, I don't know what I'm going to build. I hope I get into YC, so I'm going to throw a dart at a wall and end up with an AI agent startup. So what was the backstory of kind of how you started working on it?
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to originally when I started at college. I had no idea what a startup was. I'd never coded or anything like that in my life. And when I joined at Stanford, I joined my school's marketing club and ended up running our marketing club. And one of our first projects was a company called BeReal that had just raised $30 million in France and was trying to launch in the US.
Well, you worked on BeReal.
I didn't work on them. I just Stanford was the first campus that they wanted to launch at.
Okay.
And we were in the marketing club, so they came to us.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so we helped them pretty much expand, get in front of all the students there, do the ambassador programs and the in-person events, kind of show them what would work well in the US because they're French founders and wanted to understand what the American college scene looks like. Everyone knows it's the best place to build a social network. And so when I was doing that, I met these other guys at Stanford that were building their own social network, and that was called Fizz. And at that point, these guys, Teddy and Ashton, were freshmen. They had been upset with current social media, and they wanted to remove the idea of the social profile entirely. So there wouldn't be any sort of thing like clout or status or anything like that. And when they launched it at Stanford, they got 400 downloads on their very first day. And I joined them after that. And over the next 2.5 years, pretty much took over college campus after college campus. They dropped out at 19 and then raised over $40 million. So now it's the biggest college social network since Facebook.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that's how I got introduced to startups. I was there for about 2 years and then I left and started working with a lot of different sales teams, pretty much doing consulting for them, ran my own agency. And that was kind of how I understood the problem space.
It's so interesting. Well, there's a lot of things to talk about just from that short story, but agencies are very slept on in San Francisco. It's interesting because, I own a few, but if you were to introduce yourself to anyone in SF as oh, I have an agency, they instantly think you're trying to sell them, which is hilarious because everyone in SF is building B2B anyways. So technically everyone is trying to sell to each other. But it's agencies are one of the few startups or one of the few business models where you learn everything. It's like a crash course into startups as a whole, because you're learning about sales and you're learning about marketing and building a website and fulfilling products and hiring and firing and dealing with rejection. And What was it specifically about the agency that you were working on that led to starting Origami?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like a SaaS company is actually just an agency with a product, to provide you higher leverage with the type of work you can do. And so the thing about the agency I ran, so we worked directly with sales teams and we built custom products for them. So we'd build them data enrichment products or an AI SDR or whatever they were looking to have. And what you kind of find there is like the process of actually delivering value for a customer comes from talking to them repeatedly, figuring out exactly what they want, and customizing your product to be purpose-built for them. And even at greater scale, when you have a SaaS product and you're serving hundreds or thousands of customers, it's the same exact thing, right? You want to figure out what's going to be best for every single customer, what's going to be the best experience. And you look in customer success, they're literally meeting with their customers every week. It's just an agency on steroids in so many ways.
That's interesting. And, to take a step back again, what was it like to work on BeReal, or like, what was it like to take them or like bring them basically to America?
Yeah, no, it was crazy. They had a ridiculous budget for expansion. So, they're paying people, the ambassadors were getting $8 a download. I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, this was the peak of 2021, right? And they were blowing up, like people were going crazy on TikTok with it. They had all these viral marketing tricks that were just like, the user growth numbers were going crazy for a while.
What were some of those tricks?
So a lot of what they did was they focused on like the in-person marketing, and I think a lot of there's very few new large social networks, but a lot of what differentiates a social network now from at the very beginning when they were popping up left and right, I think is their go-to-market. Not necessarily, the product is super important, but to win, you actually need an amazing go-to-market and amazing product. And so they were taking college campus by college campus, and they would do these events, so everyone would know what it was. It's like, this is the real life in-person social network. And, to have the capital to be able to do that and to show people that your platform is something bigger than what it actually is outside the app, it worked really well for them, on top of the fact that they had a great product. And I think that's, a lot of the other social networks I've seen that have done well have taken a similar approach of focus and build the community one at a time. Or if you're doing it at scale, make sure that every single community has, proper community health.
That makes sense. And so right now with Origami, you guys had a similar kind of like very interesting GTM story, which is that you went from 0 to 50K, your first 50,000 in revenue, very quickly. And then what happened?
Yeah, so we did that, and then we had to serve our customers. We continue to scale. So to back up a little bit, we did, I was running my agency, and I was going to start my master's at Stanford. And I talked to my best friend, Kenson. And at the time, Kenson he was started as an engineer at an enterprise sales startup, had become the CTO his second year of college. And, he was just like the most smart, talented person I'd ever worked with. I'd met him years prior at a hackathon. And anytime I had like really difficult technical problems or challenges, like I would go straight to him, and he always knew immediately. I mean, he was doing some crazy stuff. And so I told him about, the product that we were working on, and we agreed to work on it together. And so I left my master's. He dropped out. He was a university student, and then we did Y Combinator. And then, during Y Combinator, we, were barely sleeping at all. We did go 0 to 50K very, very quickly. And then we had to build out our team after that. We needed a lot more people in engineering, people in sales, help with operations, customer success, et cetera. And that was kind of the genesis of the company. That was, our YC batch lasted 2.5 months. And that was the period when it was just me and Kenson, and we kind of scaled.
And so the entire YC was just you and Kenson?
Yeah.
Is that when you got your first 50,000 in revenue?
Yeah. We went 0 to 50K, the two of us, and then immediately after that, we were like, all right, we raised our seed round. Now we need to hire. We need to make sure that we can give these customers the best experience possible and continue to scale up our product, our team, and our mission.
And what were you selling to these first, like the first customers you had? What was the product at that point?
Yeah. So essentially, the genesis of our product was, when I'd worked with these sales teams, I saw that they were using kind of like the first level of the generative AI transformation, which is they're using things like ChatGPT. They might be using some level of AI agents to, access the internet and autonomously go and grab information, but it's very primitive, right? And so they're doing all their research and getting all their information with using LLMs and agents that are kind of going after a static snapshot of the internet. When you query ChatGPT, even if it's the most up-to-date version of the internet, it's just going out, looking at that snapshot, and bringing you back information. And so the issue was live information is extremely valuable, right? And so we decided to build a system of agents that live on the internet, every corner of the internet. So whenever things change, say in the comments of Twitter, or in government data, or in announcements about certain things, the agents are detecting it and giving it back to the sales team. So that's the first part, agents that live on the internet. The second part is the fact that ChatGPT is kind of like one thread, right? You're getting one response, whereas if you have thousands of agents, you can run thousands of threads at once. So you can be getting all sorts of different data points and people kind of getting thousands of different replies and answers for your things. You're not having to ask it a million different things. And so we wanted to build a system of internet agents that lived on the internet and ran in threads of thousands and purpose-built them for sales teams. So then they were, level 3. You're above agents. It's a team of agents, and you're much beyond, the LLMs that came out a couple of years back.
And so can you maybe share what one of like the early customer types of like what type of company was one of your first customers?
Yeah, so one of our first customers was a healthcare company.
Okay.
And so for them, they had their sales reps essentially going out and trying to find really niche pieces of information.
Like what?
Like let's say you want to find the readmissions rate for a hospital.
I see.
And to do that, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to look up the name of that hospital, and you're going to need to look up, their readmissions rate and look through Google, look through 10 different links, look through LinkedIn, look through pages, look through posts. And so essentially what the agents are doing is they know that this is their core goal, find this data point. Now they're going to look through all these different links themselves, click through different things, read through different things. And if any of them finds a good data source, it'll communicate with the other agents that, hey, maybe the other data sources can be found here. And if it can't find good data, it might go back and try to find a better proxy for that data. So they're kind of like autonomous, SDRs, entry-level sales reps that are doing this research for the team.
And so when you sold it to them, what did you have built out at that point? Was it just a demo?
No, so we had nothing.
Oh.
Yeah. So what we had is we asked them what data they wanted, and then we went and we were the agents, and a week later we gave them a spreadsheet.
And by that you manually went for a week and
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, so we were selling spreadsheets for our first 30K of monthly revenue. We were literally giving teams a new spreadsheet every single week. We had literally nothing, and
two things that don't scale.
Exactly. And then we had Google Sheets as our backend. A little bit longer than that. We're now off, thankfully.
Thank God. Where did you find those first customers?
Yeah, so cold email is 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
By cold email, do you mean you sent out 10,000 a month, or did you manually find like your ICP and then target them?
Yeah, so we manually found our ICP and we targeted them. I ran a cold email agency. So with my agency that I ran before, I got all of my customers, every single one, through cold outbound, the initial ones, and then referrals, et cetera. But by far the greatest channel for us was cold email.
So what was your script for you to get, like for first free agency?
Yeah, for my agency. So you try all different sets of things, right? So it really depends on the customer profile. Essentially, what my process is, first and most importantly, identify your customer profile that you want to sell to. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, the final profile that you're looking for. So early on, by far the best people to talk to are like early stage founders, right? Like they want to talk to other people and help them out, like kind of they're one rung above. And they are actually willing to take the time with you to go through the process of you trying to solve their problems. And so oftentimes, I would find early stage founders, maybe 0 to 10 people that have, the companies exactly like I'm trying to sell to. I can tell that they have a large budget, that they're selling large contracts.
How could you tell that?
You can tell by looking at their website. So
you're manually looking at all these, companies.
So the process is you start off by doing it manually. You start off manually going through and looking through what types of things do I need to see on their website? What types of things do I see on their profiles that makes them a good fit? You kind of manually build your perfect list of 50 targets. And then you use AI agents to do that. And like I said, that's our entire product. And so I've already been doing this for a while.
Interesting. So you weren't going the route of like using Apollo to like build, 0 to 10 companies, enter keywords, send to like one of those Google Sheet scrapers where they take your Apollo, URL and give you back a spreadsheet?
Absolutely not. No. If I were to go on Apollo, the other 99% of the data that's out there, does this company have a real life product that I can use? Do they have a gated demo? Are there issues with their marketing? Things like that I could actually sell them on. None of that stuff is in Apollo.
And so you're using, first you manually go and find these companies, and then you use AI to like create a lookalike audience that's much larger than your first 50?
Yeah, so I pretty much will train the AI on the different steps that I would take to do it. So I'd say go on Google and look through and find me 50 companies that are early stage healthcare companies that are most likely targeting companies that want this different data point. And they would do that by reading through, clicking through the website, looking through the history of the sales reps at that company, et cetera. So all these different data points and essentially building that list. And you can kind of go in and retrain the agents based on things that you think aren't fits. And you really just want a really targeted list and a really targeted campaign as possible, because outbound is just such a mess. Like, that's the only way you're breaking through.
So how many cold emails would you send in a week?
I'd probably send between 50 to 100 cold emails a day. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And that's, again, with your AI, like with your agents.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, so agents to build, enrich the list, et cetera. And then, you can just use a cold email center. So we don't do any automated outreach. You can just use like Instantly or something like that, Smart Lead. Yeah.
Once you put the leads inside it.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting. What do you think the ceiling is on cold email?
There's no ceiling. I mean, so there's a few different ways to answer this question. For an individual person trying to benefit their own life, network, get their first early customers, it will always be a channel. It will always be a great channel. For a business that's trying to find a reliable channel to get great ROI, the ROI in cold email is dropping every year, because there's so much spam. The deliverability gets worse every year, so there's spam filters are improving. Yeah, exactly. And so less and less people respond to cold emails every year. It's just a fact. And so if you're trying to build cold email as one of the core channels of your company, you should be doing it in a way that doesn't involve just hyperscale, right?
Got it.
You need to kind of stay ahead.
And so did you do any organic marketing outside of, that tweet that I opened this episode with?
All of our marketing has been through making posts on LinkedIn and Twitter and cold outbound.
From your personal account, not from company accounts.
Correct. Yeah. No company
How's
account
that work
activity.
for you? Like, what's been working from a personal brand, like B2B funnel?
Yeah, I mean, it works fantastic, right? Like, we can book out our sales calendar truly with hundreds and hundreds of calls from one tweet.
From one tweet?
Yeah. I think I made a tweet that got like less than 100,000 views, 3 to 6 months ago. And we booked that was the very first announcement of our company.
Oh, wow.
It was like a selfie of me and Sam Altman.
Oh, nice. This one, yeah.
Yeah. And that booked out our calendar. I think we booked like 300 demos.
300 demos from a selfie with Sam Altman?
Yeah, my calendar was 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every single day of the week, like filled for like 3 or 4 weeks. It could have been more, to be honest with you.
And if you were to like reverse engineer why that was, what would you say outside of, okay, let's say take a tweet that didn't involve Sam Altman, right? Like, how do you actually make it such that, when you make a tweet or you make a LinkedIn post, you're going to make sales calls off of it?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is just like the audience that you're going after and what the call to action is, in my experience. So my kind of framework for this is content is the most powerful channel in 2025, right? Like, you've seen people like Mr. Beast. This was not possible 5-10 years ago, right? Like, this is the new news. It's the new way people consume and the new way that people perceive the internet. So if you're not doing content for your company, you're losing out on the most valuable channel. The way that we think about it is there's two things that are infinite leverage, and those are code and content. And so content is extremely important because you get to tell the story of your company. And so my kind of approach to content is you want to, get in front of as many people as possible that are within your audience. I'd rather have like 50,000 of the right views than 9.5 million of the wrong views. And so a lot of it is like, engaging in the communities you're trying to engage with, making content that those people care about. So I only ever make content around founder lifestyle, early stage company, et cetera. I wouldn't post about, anything else, even if I thought it was funny, whatever, because no one following me cares about that stuff.
Really? You don't think so? So one of the things that, like, when we give advice to people in our batch, for example, we'll say there's like two types of content. There's like, your call to action, like your hook. And then there's like, just like random filler stuff that makes you not look like a bot. And so, one of our companies, his name is like Founders Arm, right? Rayan. He posts the most random, egregious things on Twitter sometimes. Like, I'll see his tweets sometimes, I'll text him, I'll be like, "Yo, you should probably delete this." And he never does. But he's booked more sales calls that like converted, where they've like mentioned like, "Oh, I follow you on Twitter, I think your stuff is funny," versus like the obviously the professional tweets do really well as well. But have you experimented at all with like the random, more like funny personal tweets?
Yeah, I mean, we don't really talk about our company on my Twitter. Like, we never say what we do, whatever, and it works perfectly well. Like, we've had sales reps, we've closed companies that have hundreds of people, and they were like, I was like, "How did you find out about something?" Like, "I think I saw a post about a triple bunk or something."
That's so funny.
Like, it doesn't really matter once they, it's like you see this thing for 5 seconds, it gets your interest, you book a demo, and then you're talking to this guy for like 30 minutes. Like, "Oh, this is actually really useful. I actually really like this guy." Like, the initial channel didn't matter at all.
Are you still the one doing the sales calls?
No, I don't do the sales calls.
And so do you find that like the whole personal brand, people kind of being down to talk to you because they followed you, does that fall off once now they get on the call to someone else?
I don't think so, because you can see when you're booking the call who the call is going to be with. And honestly, I think 99% of the people that are seeing it are not booking calls. So it really only would be the people that are like interested enough to go to the profile, look at the website, and be like, okay, this is actually worth 30 minutes of my time a week later.
And when you're setting up like your Calendly, are you doing anything around like only 48 hours into the future, or like, you can't book calls next week, or have you optimized it at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what does your stack look like?
Yeah, so I mean, when we first got started, we had no stack at all. So I was taking calls randomly on Saturday and Sunday. It was miserable, and I was just take calls all day. I'd take 14 hours of calls and then stay up all night coding with Kenson. And it was absolutely miserable because like you just can't stop. You can't say no when people are interested in your product. But what you realize is you would actually rather take 1/10 as many calls and go in better prepared and have those be better calls, more qualified customers. So we qualify religiously now. We have very regimented time blocking. We have days where we don't take calls, where we focus on customers. We only take calls on days where people we're trying to talk to are likely to book, and they have to book a certain amount out. Usually because we already have stuff planned for like the rolling 2-3 days out.
Right. Interesting. And so now then to like shift over into like what it's actually like to build this company from like a culture perspective. When you started the company, it was like you and one of your homies, right? Like Kenson, because you guys are friends.
Yeah.
And it was just you two all throughout Y Combinator, or like all through your batch. And then what happened?
Yeah. So after that, we needed help most on sales. Like we had too many sales calls. And so I got introduced through one of our investors to a guy named Luke.
Who did your seed round?
We raised from angel investors. Yeah. And I talked to Luke immediately. I knew I was like, this guy is fantastic. He is going to kill it. And then through Luke and the rest of my friends, like we just started adding more and more people. We still had more sales calls that needed to be taken. We need to do a lot of engineering, et cetera. And so I just started calling my friends and essentially telling them like, yo, like I really need help with my startup right now. Like we're blowing up. And like you're the smartest person I know for product design or for engineering or for front end, et cetera. And I would fly them out here, get them working on it for a couple of days, and then once I felt the energy and the passion there's just no turning back.
Oh, and so you close all your friends basically.
Yeah.
That's exciting. What broke then? Because I've worked with friends. I still do. A majority of our companies / people we work with are all just like friends that I've had for years now. And what that leads to is like the highest of high in terms of like, it's like the highest highs. And then occasionally, once every few months, there's like a really low that comes from doing business with friends.
Yeah, it's really difficult to balance a lot of the time. And it really depends on the personality. So even a lot of my best friends that are super smart, I could never work with, And so the most important thing I've found is like very much like non-overlapping skill sets, orthogonal skill sets, working on two completely different things so that you're just going to trust their judgment on that because they're just better. I think where you start having challenges is when two people are taking kind of the same domain, because then you're actually competing with your friend on the idea, and then you might think that you have more credibility in telling them no. Whereas, if my friend is insanely good at this thing, that takes a lot of the potential for conflicts off the table. Of course, there's still be conflicts, but in my experience, that's where the most out of hand ones become.
And so what does your actual like week look like as a company? Are you doing Monday stand-ups, or are you using Notion? Like, how do you actually lay it out?
Yeah, so we have stand-ups on the engineering team every morning. We work 6 days a week, and we work essentially from 10 to 10 or 11 every day. And so, sales team's in earlier. Sales team's in at like 6 or 7. Yeah. And so I'm in with the sales team. And then, we've got sales calls all day in the sales room. We've got customer calls all day in the customer success room. And then on engineering, they're just pushing out new products, new features, testing new stuff. And there's a lot more engineering. So, it's a very engineering and product focused company. So that room is a lot more like quiet, focused, dedicated.
Interesting. And who leads the engineering team?
That's my co-founder, Kenson. Yeah.
And you're leading like the sales, marketing, everything else?
Yeah, sales, marketing, operations, customer success.
Interesting. And so you have daily stand-ups on engineering?
Yeah.
The rest of the company?
Yeah, on the rest of the company, it's just, one-on-ones as needed. We don't have any scheduled recurring meetings. We have an all hands on Friday.
Why on Friday?
It's kind of like you finish the week, kind of recap, and it's very brief. It's just like a few shout outs and what everyone got done in 1 minute. And so that meeting might be 30 minutes.
Okay.
and that's it. Once a week meeting for 30 minutes with the whole team, engineering stand-ups for 10, 15 minutes. All the rest of the time, everyone's just executing.
And right now you have 10 people on the team.
Mm-hmm.
How fast did you go from 2 to 10?
Probably about 50 days.
Explain that.
Yeah, so at the time that we had 2 people, like, I don't think it was possible to be physically working more than me and Kenson were. You know, I would take sales calls from 6 or 7 a.m. till 8 or 9 p.m. Every single day, and then stay up working with him on product, and he would just be working on product all the time. So we were, you know, sleeping, you know, 1 or 2 hours a day, all the time. You know, looking back, you shouldn't do that. You should just take less of the sales calls, but you just can't stop sometimes. And so we knew that we needed people so badly. And so as soon as we raised our seed round, and kind of got like a couple days where we could get organized, we just started trying to spin up a recruiting pipeline, talking to as many people as we could, and we lined up work trials essentially for the next 2 months.
What goes into a work trial?
Work trial essentially means that they went through the first stages of your, you know, interview, second round, third round, and you thought that they could be a great potential fit. So you got them out to your office. Work trials, you know, experimented between 1 to 5 days,
Okay.
and they work with the team. And then after that, you can make a decision on their offer.
And as you're a company that's like hiring people so quickly, and it's, you know, you're literally going from 0 to 1 from a hiring perspective.
Yeah.
What did onboarding look like? Because as the founders, you guys are still drowning in everything else you have to do as founders.
Yeah.
But the onboarding is arguably like one of the most important parts of bringing someone onto the team.
Yeah, there's very little onboarding. I would probably argue that some people would say there was no onboarding. Like once they came, I was just like, all right, man,
No.
like, yeah, not even sometimes, you know, it's just like, all right, like you're working on this, like one sentence essentially about what you're working on, like you're taking customer calls, you're getting on sales calls, and then they kind of figure out the rest. So that's why you really need to optimize for high agency people that are just going to teach it themselves. And then by like 3 days, they've essentially created their own crash course and trained themselves. And that was really the only thing we were capable of doing.
I think it was interesting. I forget who I was talking to this about. It was last week. I think it might have been the WAP guys. And what they were basically saying is like, you know, when you're a super early stage company, you're optimizing for the top 1% and nothing less than that. Versus if you're a Stripe or a Google level company, you're just trying to get like the top 20% of the market. But especially if you're like sub 10 people, every single person you add onto the team will either make or break the company with the culture that they bring.
Yeah.
But everyone kind of like knows this, and then they go try to build their own company, and they're like, I don't know what good culture is. I don't know how to determine if someone, you know, should or shouldn't be on the team. Have you had to fire anyone recently?
We have had to fire someone before.
What goes into that decision?
It's the worst thing that you ever have to do, hands down. It makes you regret starting a company. It's, you know, when you're moving really, really quickly and you're hiring a lot of people, mistakes are going to be inevitable. And the hiring mistakes are the most difficult ones because there's nothing you can do to correct it oftentimes. With things with product, customers, et cetera, there's always usually some sort of fix. But with people things, there's some things that you can't take back or change. And so it just makes things really difficult.
Have you ever had to fire one of your friends?
I have,
What was
yeah.
that like?
It was super unfortunate. It's just super painful because they trusted you, and they took a bet on you, and they know that you knew them very well. And so it's, you know, it's just 100% your fault, right, for the whole situation. And so that's the double-edged sword, right? Like you need to be willing to break friendships and feel insane amounts of pain and regret and loss if you want to achieve greatness with bringing friends onto your team and, you know, build something with your best friends for years to come, because it's not all, you know, sunshine.
Yeah, you know, I remember with Founders Inc., we hosted this conference like 2-3 years ago now called AISF, right? And I think it was one of the first conferences we ever hosted. And, you know, with the team, especially at that point, it was very small. It was maybe like 5 or 6 of us. At that point, I had someone on the team who, like, one of my boys, he still works there today. He lived on my couch at that point. And I remember, like, vividly, we came back from the conference and, like, at the very end of it, and, you know, we're all just kind of, like, sitting in, like, the empty office. And it was one of those moments of, like, this moment is so much deeper because of the people that I'm experiencing it with, versus if it was just like a random company and it's, you know, we had strung together a bunch of people last minute. We met like a month ago. And like that was like a very defining moment, I think, for me as for what kind of became like the rest of my career up until this point. Because it showed me like, oh, like you really want to build stuff with people you care about, because that makes every moment that you go through just that much more meaningful. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, I think there's been so many. I mean, what you kind of realize is like building a company is just, at the end of the day, it's such a fundamentally human and people and like endeavor, you know? It's not about the product or the technology. It's all about just a group of people trying to do something, right? And so I think there have been so many times where like, you know, someone just like has an insane win on the team. You know, it can be completely outside of the company, right? Or when someone just moves there, like pretty much everybody moved to San Francisco for this company, right? Like they were all over. And so like, you know, helping people move in, like get their lease, like, you know, set up their life around this, like, you know, knowing nobody in the city and then watching people become friends through your company and through like the culture and watching it build and kind of the butterfly effect come from that, from something that didn't exist more than 8 months ago, is crazy to watch.
That is very interesting. Especially like what you mentioned was that stuck out to me was like watching people that you bring onto the team then make their own friendships and then like become their own characters in the city.
Yeah, 100%. But San Francisco's back.
San Francisco's very back. When you think about your time at Stanford versus your time in the city, how do you think about like the differences between the two of them?
Yeah, completely different cultures around building companies. I would say like in San Francisco, everyone's pretty all in. You know, like you came to San Francisco, you came here for a reason. And there's usually no going back, you know? And so you have to make whatever you're doing work. And it's a very different culture from Stanford, where Stanford, people don't like failure, you know? You feel like you've already achieved a lot and you don't want to be seen as a failure by the people around you. And so, you know, even though a lot of people are interested in startups and will in the future years into their career do startups, the prospect of failing super early on in their career is definitely a very scary thing.
It's interesting you mentioned that because it's like startups have been so much more commercialized in the last 5 or 10 years, especially with like, you know, now that everyone's focused on content, which is a great thing, a lot of it becomes more accessible, which is also a great thing. And so I saw this tweet earlier today. I forget who posted it, but she was basically talking about how there's this well-known founder that's like going around SF and his metric and his background and his revenue and everything is made up. And like, especially in the last 2 years, there have been a lot of cases of that. Just because it is like one of those things where if you hear enough people talk and pitch and talk about their company, you can kind of figure out like pretty simply like what to say such that someone will meet you for the first time and think you're someone that you're not. Have you dealt with a lot of that at Stanford?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of charlatans and people talking more because, you know, kind of the culture of the school is like to get what you want next. Everyone's trying to optimize for the next thing on their resume, the next line on their LinkedIn. And to do that, they feel like they have to keep, you know, building that stack of things that's just, you know, a bunch of exaggerations or outright lies. And so, well, you know, at the end, when you come out of it, you have no real experience at all. You know, you've just done things to put on your resume. And then as soon as you got accepted or started the job or whatever, you were looking at the next thing and not invested in it whatsoever.
You know, it's interesting because the tweet that you put out, the one that got 9 million views, you were like, I dropped out of school on my first day, or I dropped out of Stanford on my first day. And that is true. But is it true?
Yeah, I dropped out of my master's. So I did graduate from my bachelor's, and then I was about to start you know, a year-long program at Stanford. And, you know, I was not very fired up about it, to be honest. I love building things. I'd been building things for the last 3 years. And, you know, it was really only a matter of time until I decided to leave.
So what was the thought process first in like staying at school? Because you said your friends that you were working on a company with them and got a bunch of traction and went on to be relatively successful, but you didn't drop out with them versus eventually then you ended up doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
What was like the thought process throughout?
Yeah, so at Fizz, I mean, I had been on campus when, you know, they ended up dropping out. I'd been on campus for a couple weeks. And so
Semester's the best one.
yeah, I mean, it's crazy to be on campus for a couple weeks, right, in person, and, you know, people are dropping out. There's this company that's taking off. Like, you know, what are you going to do? You know, what are you going to tell your parents? And so it was a really different position than I was 4 years later after having experienced it, seen it's possible, seeing that I know what to do and feeling, you know, this is absolutely what I love doing. There's no better feeling than trying to do this thing. And this is what I want to do.
But you wrote it out like till the end, right? You graduated versus like, you know, dropping out after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah.
So what was that like decision-making process?
Yeah, so I was very productive in school with respect to running my agency and working at startups. You know, I did very little class. I was traveling around working on stuff. But at Stanford, it's pretty easy. They kind of give you ways that there's a lot of great inflation, right? And so you can do a lot of things on the side.
That makes sense. That's very cool. If you were to think about like, do you have any younger siblings?
I do, yeah, I have two.
How old are they?
One's 2 years younger than me, and my sister's 4 years younger than me.
And so when you're giving them advice as to like what career path they should go down, especially with everything that's changed in the last 2 or 3 years,
Yeah.
what are you telling them?
Yeah, so I'm very biased.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be a startup, but I do think that having agency over your life is very important to establish early on. And agency is pretty synonymous to risk. So it's like the most cliche stuff ever to be like, take risks, right? But like you have to convince people and show them other people that take risks and that it failed and like nothing happened
Yeah.
in order to have them embrace that type of mindset. And so I have absolutely been super proud, like take as many risks as you possibly can, like, you know, take a semester off or go travel, do whatever, just try to get off like the most common path because that will funnel you towards the thing that everyone's telling you that you need to do, that you think you need to do, that maybe there's something else that you'd rather be making 1/10 as much money and having a way more fulfilled life if you did.
That's interesting. And so are you suggesting that they graduate or are you telling them to take a semester off?
No, that's just an example. Yeah, everyone's path is different.
Everyone's path is different.
Yeah.
It is cool because like depending on which school you go to, there is like a very easily reversible decision of like whether or not you should drop out. Like for me, it started off as, oh, I'm just going to take a gap semester after my freshman year of college, which turned into a gap year because I joined Founders Inc. in that gap semester. Then that was like, okay, I don't think I want to go back to school for a while. Versus like, you know, when you tell someone that you dropped out, they think one day you know, got up and told the university, I'm leaving, I hate you, I'm never coming back. Versus like most people have the ability to like go back even to this day 4 or 5 years later.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool, like, especially when I was at Founders Inc., you would see so many more people taking gap semesters because they were just like startup curious, like, oh, I think it's
Yeah.
build something. And then they come out and 4 months later, they're either back in school or they've raised like a seed round.
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, are you going back?
Not for a while.
But you will?
I don't think I would.
You don't think you would?
I don't think I would. I think it's just like the only reason I wanted to go back before was Phil's like, oh, it'd be interesting to like finish out college and like, you know, do a degree in neurology, like, you know, something like in bio. But I just think there's so much of like an opportunity cost that comes with like, there's a lot of good in college, but I would argue that like the best part of college is the fact that you are now on a walking radius with a bunch of other people your age and you're all trying to figure out life together and you learn a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about the different routes in life that you have from that, like, you know, like exposure shock of like being in a place like that. And I think that like those rewards or like those benefits kind of diminish as you get older because you see so much of it by not, you know, just by experiencing life.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you'd have like 3 more years to do anyways.
Facts. Man, you're gonna see me do one of those 6-month degrees just to get it over with.
Yeah, seriously. I might go back and get my associates.
Facts. I might go back to get my associates. And oh, I saw this tweet today. It was from what's her name? Anna Artho. She was like, YC sentiment check. And it was like, YC is great, YC is not good, or some version of that. And when I clicked on it, the bottom tab, which is YC is not good, was resoundingly, you know, higher. So you went through YC. What's it like?
It was fantastic. Like we would not have it's literally a startup accelerator in the most literal sense. We would not have accelerated to the degree that we did had we not done YC. And I don't know if there's anywhere else that you could have accelerated, you know, taken your company and seen a different outcome entirely than YC. But it's very dependent on your company, right? And so if you're in B2B and particularly in B2B SaaS, and you want your earliest customers are other AI early stage companies, like being in that network and having, you know, people that have done it literally thousands of times before is so helpful. If you're doing something else, you know, it might not be that helpful for you, to be honest. And of course, a lot of the philosophies, you know, that YC kind of pushes and teaches for people in it are actually really counterproductive for many, many companies.
Like what?
For example, I think that there's a really big focus on B2B. And so if you're a consumer, you know, you're probably going to feel very alone there. But I think that there's a very big focus on like product-led companies versus this kind of what we referenced before, like running your company like an agency at the beginning, going sales-led and building custom software. I think a lot of YC's philosophy was shaped by their early wins. So companies like Reddit and DoorDash and Airbnb that, like, you know, they built the first amazing product of its category. And the product, you know, absolutely took off. And now there's so much software on the internet that if you're trying to just put something out there, and, you know, you have some people using it, you're looking at analytics and tweaking stuff to try to make it better for them, it's going to be really difficult for you to stand out. And we see big examples, companies like Cursor, et cetera, that did, you know, win with product-led growth. But in this day and age, I think it's easier for 99% of people to run their startups very much like agencies and build custom software and really get to the bottom of what's useful for any given customer and to do that sales-led thing, essentially sell before you build. And I don't think that that's very much the ethos of YC, but it's very much something that I'm very pro.
Very interesting. I think your point about it being great for B2B makes sense because one of the biggest advantages of being in YC is similar to what we talked about with like being on a college campus. You just get thrust into this environment where everyone around you is like sharing their learnings and like trying to navigate the space. And if all of you are in B2B or if all of you are building software, there are so many almost truths where like 90% of the time you should do this thing. Like 90% of the time you should have post-hog amplitude mixed panel set up. 90% of the time you should be, selling before you have a product built out. You should be, posting online and sharing what you're building in person and sharing your wins online because that turns out to more growth. And I think by going into any program that is, has a high enough quality bar, you will probably learn a lot from it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And there's a bunch of really great accelerators. I think, for example, Aleph is, the best at what they do. I definitely think that's much significantly better in so many ways for so many different types of companies, right? Go after what you're looking for, seek it out, and embrace it.
Awesome. So I'm going to ask you the question that I ask everyone at the end of these episodes, which is if you were to do this podcast again in a year, what would you have want to accomplish by then to consider the past year a success?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would love to, have our products being used by the largest companies in the world, have an even bigger and more amazing team. Most importantly, I would really like the culture that we've built to be preserved. If we can preserve and build on the culture that we've established here, like there's no way that we could possibly fail. Just to focus on getting the most high agency people and letting them do their thing. Like if you can find a way to scale that up, like your company's gonna make it no matter what you're doing. And so I really hope a year from now, like we have the same exact ethos and culture, and we just have more people doing it.
Nice, man. We'll see you in a year.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me.